All right, hey Keith, we're in James, got down to about verse 8, and the last time. And before we get into that, I mentioned that I wanted to look at a few verses from the Proverbs and a couple from Psalms, and we're just going to flip through them really, really quick. But Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, except for Jesus, of course, had a lot to say about the tongue, and I'm not going to read all of these, but if those of you that write them down or you want to flip through it as we go through, we won't stop and make a lot of comments on it, but I did want to mention some of the things that he says about it. Many of the things that he says or alludes to, James mentions here in James chapter 3 about the power of the tongue. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil. One of the things that the Bible says that God hates, it refers to the tongue, and we want to look at that one first real quick. So he says a lot about the tongue and the power of the tongue and how it can be used for good, how it can be used for evil. The first one is Proverbs 6 and verse 17, and I put these in order of the verses so it'd be easy to kind of flip through them real quick. But in Proverbs 6 and verse 17, the previous verse, Solomon mentions 7 things that God hates, 7 things that are abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaks lies, and he that sows discord among brethren. If you notice that, 3 of the 7 involve the tongue. 4, if you want to look at the heart that devises wicked imaginations, that could be involve the tongue as well. But certainly a lying tongue, a false witness that speaks lies, and a person that sows discord among brethren. So this shows you the importance of the tongue, or how God views the misuse of the tongue. So 3 of the 7, 4 if you want to count that one, that God says he hates, that are abomination to him. Proverbs, and anytime y'all want to jump in and add to that, jump in anytime. Proverbs 10 and verse 20, the tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. So again, talking about it can be used one of 2 ways. You got the tongue of the just, and we'll have 2 or 3 other verses about that in just a moment as well. Talks about how significant, how important that is, how beautiful it is, described as choice silver. Proverbs 12, verses 18 and 19. There is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise is health. The lip of truth shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. But it has catastrophic effects many, many times about a person that tells a lie about somebody else. We see this often in politics, of course, but that's not the only venue where that happens. But he's talking about a person, he that speaketh like, there is that speaketh like the piercings of a sword. In other words, it's very, what is the word I'm looking for, Scott? Very catastrophic, I guess you'd say, that it can destroy, like the piercings of a sword. It can destroy. A lying tongue, he says, is but for a moment, and so forth. Proverbs 15 and verse 2. Again, contrasting the proper use of the tongue with someone that causes evil with the tongue. The tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright, but the mouth of the fools poureth out foolishness. So again, contrasting how it can be used one way or the other. In that same passage, in verse 4, Proverbs 15:4, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness thereof is in perverseness therein is a breach in the spirit. So again, talk about a wholesome tongue and how significant that is, and how much good that it can actually do. And then in Proverbs 17 and verse 20, he that hath a froward heart findeth no good, and he that hath a perverse tongue falleth into mischief. And we see that happens. That happens quite a bit as well. Proverbs 18 and verse 21. This is one that we used before, I think maybe a week or so ago. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Well, back in Solomon's day, a king, and that's mentioned in the Bible many, many times, a king has power over whether you live or whether you die, certainly so. But even today, it does much, much good, or it can do untold damage or untold harm.
You see a lot, Lester, about teenage suicide because
Somebody said something.
Bullied so much.
Yep.
By fellow students, they just think there's no other.
Can't take it anymore. Right. And the perverse use of the tongue, like you were just saying, how much damage that does. And we say it all the time, where the kid is bullied and said, I can't take it anymore. You know, so they're using the tongue to bully, to harass, and those kind of things has devastating consequences. And that's what he's saying there. It's like the piercing of a sword. It's that old expression about sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's not true. You know, I don't know who coined that, but we know that that's not true. What, Scott?
Court of law did the same thing to you. Court of law.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And somebody can come up with a lame attempt to ruin you, and so they'll try to sue you.
Oh yeah.
And while they're suing you, their attorney will try to come up with whatever lie he can think of.
Yeah.
And of course, when you go through a divorce, the same thing happens.
Yeah, same thing.
And,
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, they'll dream it up and pour it out there.
Yeah. To show you how it can be used badly, Elaine and I have been following this case with this little boy that's probably 10, 12 years old in Kansas City, that a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. And so they were playing, I guess they were playing Oakland, not Oakland now, I guess it's Las Vegas Raiders or who it is. I don't keep up with the NFL anymore. But they were playing in Las Vegas, and this little kid, big Chiefs fan, and he painted his face, half of it black and half of it red. Well, this black guy that's, I don't know if they call it deadpan or something. It's some type of blog or some type of program that he's got. He just excoriated that little boy. He called him a racist and all kind of things because what they did, they filmed him from one side, which just showed the black face, and didn't film the other side, which showed the red face. He called him a racist. My point is how you can use the tongue to try to destroy a kid that's there to support his team, to cheer on his team and everything. And Jesse Waters is going to have him on tonight. I'm anxious. I told Elaine I wanted to pull up that interview of that little boy, because he's going to have him, I guess, and his dad maybe, or his attorney on tonight. Jesse comes on at 7, so we'll miss it. But she'll pull it up and see the interview. But that just shows you what you can do to hurt somebody, try to destroy somebody, destroy a kid that's out just to have a good time. There's not a racist bone in the kid's body, in all likelihood. He's there just to support his team. He wasn't even thinking about painting his face, half of it black, half of it red, the Chiefs colors, kind of thing. What are Georgia's colors? Red and black? Charlie, don't you paint your face this week red? What's Georgia's colors? Red and black? Don't you come up Saturday with
jerseys are red.
Somebody might film you and get you in trouble.
They're
red and black.
He painted his gold and white.
Georgia Tech. Yeah, Georgia Tech. So just don't do it, is what I'm saying. All right, Proverbs 21 and verse 6. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity tossed to and fro of them that seek death. So in other words, to benefit yourself financially, by lying and conniving and so forth and so on. Seems like we got one of that going on with somebody that's in pretty high office in the country today. Proverbs 21 and verse 23. This is a good one. Good advice. Whoso keepeth his mouth and his tongue keepeth his soul from troubles. That's one we ought to commit to memory maybe. Proverbs 25 and 15. By long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. In other words, you can diffuse a situation and make the situation much better if you handle it right. In that same chapter, Proverbs 25 and 23, the north wind driveth away rain, so doth an angry countenance a backbiting tongue. So again, the harm or the danger that can occur with the wrong use of the tongue. Proverbs.
Next verse, verse 24.
Yeah, go ahead, Roy, read it.
It's better to dwell in the corner of the housetop than with a brawling woman.
Oh my goodness,
White House.
that didn't go out over the video, did it?
Oh, I hope not.
Yeah, there are two or three like that.
I'm there also.
Yeah, there's another one too about that. Solomon should know about that because he had 1,000 of them, didn't
He about had 4 or 5 in there.
he? Yeah, he had some that he couldn't control, probably.
Brother Lester, at that first verse that you read, where the 7 things that are an abomination. Could you elaborate on the proud look? Which I know what a proud person would be. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think? Could you elaborate on what you think that specifies? Or
I don't know.
exactly?
It's one of those deals where you can kind of recognize it when you see it, but it's hard to describe it. Somebody that looks down on you, that's arrogant, that's haughty, I guess is the way that you do it. Just that I'm better than you look kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm up here, you're down here, you're not as good as me kind of. In other words, what it's saying is you don't have to say it, you can just demonstrate it by the way that you look, maybe.
Yeah.
Being arrogant, haughty, lifted up with pride. That's the way that I would describe it. All right, and one more in Proverbs 28 and verse 23. He that rebuketh a man afterwards shall find more favor than he that flattereth with the tongue. In other words, a lot of times flattery will get you nowhere. Well, sometimes it gets you somewhere. But what he's saying is that if you're doing something wrong, if somebody doesn't just gloss over it and let it go, but that person, if he's a true friend, iron sharpens iron, as he said, and afterwards, it's kind of like in Hebrews 12, where the Bible talks about the chastisement of the Lord. It's not pleasant at the time that you are being chastised or being rebuked, but later on, if it yields the peaceable fruit that it's supposed to yield, then you'll appreciate it more than somebody that just told you what you wanted to hear, kind of thing. I think is what he's saying there. Go ahead, Charlie. I want 2 more in Psalms that I wanted to just read real quick. And while I'm turning there, Charlie, you
All right.
give us a verse.
In Proverbs 24:26, every man shall kiss his lips that giveth a right answer.
There you go. You got to speak right. Absolutely. Good point. One in Psalms is Psalm 34 and verse 13. And it's asking a question in verse 12. What man is he that desireth life and loveth many days, that he may see good? Well, here's the answer. Keep thy tongue from evil and thy lips from speaking guile. So if you want to have a good life, if you want to have a lot of good, see that you see many days, love many days, that's one way to do it, is to watch what you say and how you say it. And then the last one that I want to read, and then we'll get into our text, is Psalm 64 and verse 3. Well, let me read verse 2 because it kind of carries over to verse 3. Hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked, from the insurrection of the workers of iniquity, who whet their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words. So, good advice about watching what we say and how we say it and how we go about it. All right, any thoughts before we get into James 3, verse 8? That's kind of where we left off the last time. He talks about the fact that we can control a lot of things in the world. We can control ships with the rudder. We can control horses by putting a bit in the horse's mouth. But he says we all offend at one time or other, back in verse 2. And then he describes the tongue in verse 6 as a fire, a world of iniquity, and sets on fire the course of nature. In other words, it has devastating effects. And then he switches to the fact that many animals on the planet, in verse 7, have been tamed. Talks about all kinds of beasts and birds and serpents and things in the sea. All of these things have been tamed, but it's leading up to the fact that he says that the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. And I think what he's saying here, he's not saying that you don't have control over your tongue at times, but he's saying that in the completeness of it, who hasn't said something that he shouldn't have said? Who hadn't used the tongue in the wrong way at some point in time? He just said that we all offend in one way or the other. Sometimes we do it and we don't even intend to do it. Jesus offended many people in his day, so much so that they wanted to kill him. So, but he's saying here that
In fact, Jesus was speaking the truth.
he was speaking the truth. Absolutely, absolutely. And you and I can offend somebody by speaking the truth as well, right? But sometimes we offend somebody. A lot of times we don't even know what we did to upset somebody, and that happens sometimes. But he's saying it's very difficult to bring the tongue under total control. We can control it at times, but there's sometimes we let the situation get the best of us. We strike back. Somebody says something to us. We fire back at them, or whatever the case may be. And this is what he's saying, I think, that there are situations where it's hard to subdue it, hard to bring it totally under control. It's great if you could do it, but I don't know of anybody that has never said something that you shouldn't have said, or maybe even said it in a harsh way. Maybe, like Bill's talking about, maybe we spoke the truth, but we said it in a harsh way. The Bible says, speak the truth in love. Well, there are a lot of ways to handle that. But he says here, it's an unruly evil. He says, no man can tame it. It's an unruly evil. In other words, basically without restraint, that there's no effective check on it, is basically what he's saying here. Full of deadly poison. The reference here is to evidently to a venomous reptile, a venomous snake, that the Bible describes that in Romans 3 and verse 13, that they've sharpened their tongues like a serpent, and adder's poison is their lips. So, again, depending on the way that you use your tongue, that you can use it, as he says here, as a poisonous kind of thing, to poison the well, as we might say, or you can use it, for good. So he's saying here that it can be used as deadly poison. And then he says there are two ways we can use the tongue in verses 9 and 10. In verse 9, therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. So the tongue is used on one hand to bless God. We're Christians. We believe in God and so forth. So we bless God, we praise God, we thank God for all the things that He's done for us. So we employ the tongue in a good way, and then we turn around and have some type of problem with a person. And what he's saying is, he used the term curse, but you could use a lot of different words to describe that. It could be a lie about somebody. It could be that we slander somebody. It could be that we misrepresent somebody. We defame somebody in some way or the other. So, and he's saying, why would you do that when this person that you're saying something bad about, or lying about, or slandering about, or saying something that you shouldn't say, who's made in the image of God? In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them, back in Genesis chapter 1. And so what he's saying is that this person is made in God's image. Here we bless God, and then the person that's like God, in a sense, in His image, then we curse that person, or we say some bad things about him. He's saying how absurd that is to do that, and it's like he would describe about the fountain that brings forth salt water and bitter. That shouldn't be the case, and the fig tree that bears olive berries, that can't be. So he says the tongue should not be used that way. Any thought? Bo, go ahead.
So I'm sure everybody can relate to this, but there's always in life you come across people that are loose-lipped about just about everything.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes they'll kind of say a truth about somebody that kind of needs to hear it, but it might not be the nicest thing to say. Which I have trouble expressing to people that really need to maybe hear a truth, a criticism, but some people just can't take it right.
Yeah.
And those loose-lipped people can sometimes, they can provide a benefit in some way.
Yeah.
If it's truthful, but a lot of people aren't seeking to grow as an individual, so they take things the wrong way. So that can be a difficult thing.
Yeah.
When do you know when to be constructively critical of somebody? Because sometimes, depending on the way they take it,
Yeah.
but sometimes those loose-lipped people are kind of beneficial in that regard. I'm sure you guys can relate to that.
Exactly. And the key word that you used there was constructive criticism. And many people don't even like constructive criticism. They don't want to be criticized at all. In other words, but if you're saying something to help somebody, ever how you get the word out, that can be a good thing. It's kind of like the thing there I mentioned a while ago about iron sharpens iron sharpens iron, kind of thing. Sometimes they need to hear it, like you said. If we express it the right way, then it'll be productive. If we don't, sometimes it's Jesus talked about it. Take heed how you speak. Speaking the truth in love. We got to watch how we say what we say. And pick the right time to say that also. And I think
Constructive criticism is something directed at someone else.
That's right. Directed at me. You've
It's
been critical. Yeah, if you say it to me, you're criticizing me. You're critical. I don't like that. I'm just kidding. But I think none of us really like that. But it kind of goes back to what we said a while ago. That afterwards, if you have time to think about it and mull it over, you say, they did a service by saying that.
It's kind of like the
when-
verse,
You should really appreciate it if someone will
Yeah.
take the time and be serious about
Be serious about it.
constructive of what they're telling you.
Absolutely.
That you really need to address an issue.
It's
or
something,
that change
absolutely.
something that you're doing.
Absolutely.
You need to
But
know
often
what
they
you
don't
want to
react
hear.
that way.
That's right.
It really upsets them.
It's upsetting. That's right.
They hold a grudge for a long time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, I've had that more than one occasion, especially in the school business.
Yeah, and there's been times, I'm sure for everybody,
Yeah.
where I've walked away from something and I probably should have said something, but
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
And then you mull it over in your head, you're like, oh man, I probably should have said something a little different there.
Yeah.
Or whatever, but it can be very tough. It's
It can be
a tricky
tough.
thing.
No doubt. No doubt. Absolutely.
Sometimes it's better to walk away from something rather than say something.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Elaine told me one time, she said,
Uh-oh.
we were talking about something, she said, you blessed with a ready answer. And I So that's not a blessing, that's a curse. You need to think about what you say before you say it.
What Sewell always say about make sure your brain is in action before you put your gear in motion or something. Or
Your brain in gear before your mouth.
yeah, there you go. All right, verse 10, out of the same mouth. So he says, we bless God, and then we turn around and say things or curse a person. That's not good. And he follows up with that in verse 10, out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. So again, he just reiterates, I think, what he said in verse 9, that it shouldn't be this particular way. That it's kind of like, in a sense, we say speaking out of both sides of our mouth, at the same time. Or I think the Indians used to have an expression, speaking with forked tongue or something like that, where, you say one thing this time and another thing this time, diametrically opposed to each other. So what he's saying is, that should not be. Barnes put it this way: no organ should be devoted to uses so unlike, and the mouth should be employed in giving utterance only to that which is just, benevolent, and good. It is true, however, that the mouth is devoted to these opposite employments. It is also true of many individuals that at one time they praise their Maker, and then with the same organ slander and revile their fellow man, which we talked about. And he says, these things ought not so to be. They are so, they are incompatible, I guess is the right word. Out of the same fountain to send forth salt water and fresh, or the same tree to bear different kinds of fruit. So what he's saying is the mouth should be employed in being consistent about being saying the right thing, and not something that's diametrically opposed, praising them one time and then slandering them another time. And then he asks the question, doth the fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Of course not. That's in verse 11. It says that is incompatible. That's not going to happen. But of course it does with the tongue, is what he's saying. He says none of these things occur in nature that way, and they should not be found in man as well, is basically what he's saying there. All right, verse 12. Go ahead, Charlie.
For in Proverbs 23:9 it says, speak not in the ears of reproof, for he will despise the wisdom of thy words.
Yeah, Brother Murphy used to have an expression that you might as well save your breath and blow your coffee with it for all the good it does, right? So some people are not going to hear it, and they're not going to hear it, then don't waste your time on it. Don't waste your breath on it. Absolutely. And then the second example that he gives in verse 12, can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? Well, he's using examples that are so absurd, and to make us think that the tongue should not be used that way as well. So he said that is totally impossible for that to occur, just like the fresh water and salt coming out of the same fountain. And the same thing is true with the laws of nature, the laws that God put in. Everything's going to produce after its own kind. And he's just saying that how incompatible this is, and yet man does the same thing. I think I mentioned a week or two ago, did I mention Harry Reid a week or two ago? I think I did. But I'll mention him again in case I didn't. You remember when he got on the Senate floor and said Mitt Romney hadn't paid his taxes in 10 years or whatever. I mean, on the Senate floor, just lying about him every which way, just totally falsehood. Well, a lot of people believe that, and it shows you the damage that can be done. Now here's a situation where you're on the Senate floor and you're supposed to tell the truth, and then he just did something just totally opposite of telling the truth. Well, it did a lot of harm. It did a lot of harm to Romney. Matter of fact, when he was asked about it 2 or 3 years later, do you regret saying that? He said his response was, well, he didn't win, did he? In other words, he could justify it, because I guess he despised Romney so bad, or wanted the Democrat to win, wanted Obama to win. So, but that happens a lot in politics, and of course, it's not just in politics; it's in everyday life. We see it in every venue of life. All right, in verse 13, then he kind of flips it around and says, and keep in mind that one thing that he's talking about is the premise of all of this, of what he's talking about, is not all of you need to be teachers, basically is what he's saying. And part of the reason is the way that we conduct ourselves with our language. And so now he's kind of coming back to that. He said, well, now he's asking the question then, somebody that wants to be a teacher or a master earlier that he's talking about, he asked the question, who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation. Of course, the conversation there is talking about his life rather than his words. His works with meekness of wisdom, there in verse 13. So this is in reference to the work of a public teacher. And let me just read a statement too that Barnes makes. He said, and the meaning of the apostle is that if there were such persons among them, they should be selected for that office. In other words, if you're wise, and he's saying that the main thing that you need here is knowledge and wisdom in order to be a teacher. That's the characteristic here that's necessary. That's the qualification of being wise. And Barnes put it this way, no mere power of speaking, however eloquent it might be, was a sufficient qualification. The primary things to be sought in reference to that office were wisdom and knowledge, and they who were endowed with these things should be selected for public instructors. So he's saying somebody that's going to tell the truth, say it in the right way, kind of like what Bo was talking about a while ago, speaking the truth in love, saying the right thing, tell people what they need to hear, and preaching it in love. But he says that it needs to be predicated on the right kind of living. This person needs to live that life as well. Notice it, let him show out of a good conversation. In other words, from a correct, consistent life and deportment. In other words, this person is not good enough just to say the right things and be endued with wisdom and knowledge, but he's saying the word conversation there talks about basically an upright life rather than just what you say. In other words, how you live, how you conduct yourself. In other words, show out of your works, he says. Let him show out of a good conversation his works, not just his words, his works. So, in other words, his acts of uprightness. A person that lives a holy life, not a sinless life, but a holy life. And that's basically what he's saying. And he says he needs to predicate this with meekness of wisdom. And the meekness, and I've heard Joel talk about it, and we've talked about it before, that doesn't mean weakness. Moses, talked about Moses being the meekest man on the earth, and nobody would say that Moses was a weak man. To do what he did for 40 years, or for 80 years, 120 years, was quite remarkable. So, but he's saying that we need to have the right kind of spirit, right kind of attitude, live the right kind of life, and with a wise and prudent gentleness about yourself, not arrogant or boastful, kind of like Bo was talking about a while ago about the proud look, is to make sure that we're not arrogant, haughty. The Bible has quite a bit to say about that. Not having a noisy or stormy disposition, but characterized by a calm, gentle, and thoughtful wisdom in all of your actions of life. And that's basically what he's saying that person needs to have in order to be in that position of teacher or master, as he said earlier, meaning teacher. And then in verse 14, he says, but if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not. in other words, this referring to a spirit of ambition or contention. He says you shouldn't boast in that regard. That's not it. And he says, and that would not be one of the qualifications of a teacher, somebody that envies or strife or is of a contentious spirit. I mentioned in years gone by about this guy that used to be on TV on Sunday morning from Pensacola, and I made a comment more than once, and I was telling Lane about it one time too. Even if that guy was telling the truth, I could never be part of that organization because of the way that he said what he said. And he was down on the Church of Christ, of course, ridiculing us for believing in baptism and that sort of thing, and basically talking about, there are two gospels, one from Paul and one from Peter, and saying that Peter spoke to the Jews, and so he talked about baptism, but Paul was to the Gentiles and not. Baptism was not necessary because that's not what Paul taught. Well, we know what Paul taught and know what Paul did, so it was the same gospel, but just the way, the venom that came out of that guy's mouth, even if he was telling the truth, which he wasn't, but I could never be part of a group like that. He said, and then he says in the latter part of verse 14, and lie not against the truth. In other words, the truth has to be spoken. That is the primary requisite. So what he's saying is that men should seek no office where the whole truth is not taught. What did Paul say? That I declared unto you the whole counsel of God, and this is what I think James is saying here. So he says, this wisdom descendeth not from above, verse 15. In other words, one with a envying, contentious, cantankerous spirit. He said it didn't come from God. It didn't come from heaven. This is of the world. He says, this is earthly, sensual, devilish, there in verse 15. So a person that has this spirit of anger, contention, strife, all of those things, he says, this comes from the devil. This comes from the earth. This comes from passions that doesn't come from God. And the word sensual there, he says, it has its origin in our sensual rather than in our intellectual or moral nature. So it's not of a spiritual nature. It's, as he says here, it's of the earth. It's governed by worldly maxims and principles rather than those things that would come from heaven, come from God. All right, and then he describes the outcome of having this spirit of contention, or the spirit of being cantankerous, I guess is the right way of saying it, or not saying the right thing, or saying it in the wrong way. There in verse 16, for where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. We'll take up there, it'll be 2 weeks. I guess singing is next week, and then 2 weeks from now we'll start with verse 16. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your thoughts and your good attention.